When did the Republican Party go off the deep end? That's a question that I want to answer for you today. In order to get to my answer, I should explain what I mean by going off the deep end. I mean going off of the deep end in a unique way. So if both the Republican and the Democratic parties did something that I think is going off the deep end, I'm not going to count that against the Republican Party. Instead, I'm going to look at the point in time in which the Republican Party became uniquely untenable as an American political party. I'm going to submit to you that the late 2010s is the time period in which the Republican Party really went off the deep end. But let's start with some periods which I do not think signify the GOP going off the deep end, but that people have made arguments for. First would be the 1980s. The 1980s, pretty much solely because of President Reagan. A lot of Democrats attribute some of the modern economic problems that we have to him. They'll point to his anti-labor union policies. They'll point to some of his tax cuts for the wealthy and for the middle class. But yeah, he was an interesting guy for sure. Definitely marked a tide shift from Jimmy Carter. His foreign policy still gets a lot of praise to this day. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Who could ever forget that iconic line? But yeah, he is not necessarily a unique president in the sense that his policies were just some horrific deviation from what should be seen as normal. He did kind of mark an end to the New Deal era, but his policies alone didn't necessarily bring about that. If we look at George H.W. Bush, who was also a Republican, he was a little more moderate than Reagan. And then we look at Bill Clinton, who was of course more moderate than Reagan as a Democrat, but also continued some of the welfare reform that Reagan tried, was generally a pro-business president, and a more conservative guy. He described himself as a new Democrat, meaning he's a centrist. So Reagan, I do not see as being an example of the Republican Party going off the deep end. We can point a lot of fingers at Reagan for some other things, but I don't think that the policies that he advocated for signify truly going off the deep end. I think there's a lot of reason that we may disagree with the Reaganite policies, but not necessarily treat them as some aberration. Furthermore, the Bush era, I'm talking about Bush Jr., his era, it was somewhat similar to Reagan in a sense, except it was more so on foreign policy where he gets the criticism for having gone off the deep end. So George W. Bush is probably most well known for the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Dick Cheney, of course, gets a lot of the heat for that too. And yeah, here's why I don't think that this is an example of the Republican Party going off the deep end. I think that a lot of the conservative movement and a lot of the modern Republicans who throw themselves into presidential races have started to repudiate the Bush doctrine. They've said that they disagreed with it. They said that the Iraq War was a mistake. Donald Trump is a famous example. He even criticized Hillary Clinton in 2016 for supporting the Iraq War. Joe Biden also, as a senator, supported the Iraq War. So the Iraq War had massive Democratic support. Obviously, right now, it has very little Democratic support. Almost every Democrat is against it, and most Republicans are against it as well, including high-profile Republicans. Think of Vivek Ramaswamy calling Nikki Haley Dick Cheney and 3-inch heels. So the neocon worldview has kind of been beaten back by the Republicans, at least in terms of their rhetoric. Now, obviously, Trump may pursue plenty of neocon economic policies, but on rhetoric, he often criticizes what would be neoconservatism. So I do not think that the Bush era represents the Republican Party going off the deep end in a unique sense, because the Democratic Party also participated in that, and because the Republican Party, in terms of their rhetoric, has started to self-correct. They're not out there defending the Iraq War as of 2024. The Obama era. Obviously, the Republicans didn't have that much power during the Obama era. It wasn't until 2015 when they took the Senate in the 2014 midterms. But overall, they had a presence. They obstructed him a lot. They criticized him using very scathing language, questioning whether he was born in America. But yeah, I don't see this as being the time in which the Republican Party really went off the deep end. I see this as negative campaign tactics. smearing, stuff that's not totally unimaginable in American politics, even prior to that point. We had people who campaigned harshly. We had people who publicly criticized the president in extremely aggressive terms, who made criticisms of the president that were totally baseless and unfair. I think that the late 2010s is that time period in which the Republican Party went off the deep end. And no, I'm not just referring to Donald Trump being elected. So hear me out. Trump gets elected in 2016. I don't think that the Republican Party has gone off the deep end at that point. I don't. There were still plenty of Republicans willing to say, no, I am not standing with this guy. I know one example, this is pretty famous, well, not super famous, but it's on Wikipedia, is the former lieutenant governor of my home state of Michigan, Brian Calley, in 2016. He said that he was not gonna endorse Trump after the Access Hollywood tapes came out. In fall 2018, though, it was fall 2020, he changed his tune completely. He said he was on board with Trump, and even in an interview, he acted kind of incredulous and confused when a reporter asked him a question, bringing up the fact that he had formerly criticized Trump. So he essentially kind of just became a pro-Trump guy, a more sympathetic to Trump guy. And it was really shocking to me to see that. But yeah, there are obviously people who backed away from Trump and have stayed backing away from him in the Republican Party. But yeah, 2017 rolls around, Trump does some generic conservative policy. He's not really showing his true colors yet as a human being, or at least I guess I should say as a threat to democracy. He did insist that maybe the 2016 election would be rigged if he lost. That didn't happen. He didn't lose. He went on, he did all of his, his tax cut bill at the end of 2017. He scrapped the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He did that missile strike on Syria, which is kind of just some neoliberal, neocon policy, whatever you want to call it. So, whatever. So far, it just seemed like a generic president. 2018 is a lot more of the same. And then we get 2019, where I noticed he started to really go off the deep end. And we were kind of seeing what was going to happen in 2020, or at least a little bit of foreshadowing of it. In 2019, he of course tweeted that members of the squad, who are minority women, should go back to their country. I famously remember that. Well, I remember that a famous tweet from July 2019. He suggested that they who were born in America, most of them, go back to their country. And a lot of people in the Republican Party they didn't want to take questions about it. I remember some senators being asked, and they said they just walked away from reporters. But yeah, a lot of people online defended that. People said this can't be racist because he didn't mention race in it. And it's like, wait, whoa. What's the standard for being racist here? You don't need to explicitly mention race in order to be making a racist remark. So what we kind of see is how Republicans, right-wingers, some party officials, some just regular commentators are shifting their stance on what's acceptable depending on whatever suits Trump the most. They're moving the goalposts and basically saying, yeah, no, I'll tolerate more of this nonsense. After all, it's the leader of my party who's doing it, and if I disavow the leader of my party, then I don't have a party, so I gotta have some guy to root for, some god, some messiah. So they stick with Trump. And then in 2020, again, we can debate the merits of some of his policies that he had implemented up until that point. But I think during the 2020 election, with the election denial, this is truly where we can see that he's gone off the deep end and where the Republican Party has gone off the deep end. We see him sowing the seeds of doubt, refusing a peaceful transition of power. Biden promises a peaceful transfer of power if he loses, or not to question the results. And this is where we see that there's no false equivalency anymore. The Democrats and the Republicans may both have backed the Iraq War, but the Republicans are saying, if I lose, it's because it's rigged, and the Democrats are not. There's no false equivalency here. One party has gone off the deep end. The other has unquestionably not on this issue. And this is an existential issue for our country. It's a watershed moment. From here on out, I don't think that it's inconceivable that every single Republican candidate that we get each 4 years would go and say, if I lose, it's because the election's rigged. Question the election results, and then maybe something like January 6th happens. Maybe something not as bad as it, or even worse. But yeah. So the late 2010s is my answer for when the Republican Party went off the deep end. The 2020s, we're seeing kind of a continuation of that, a validation of that. If Trump had simply accepted the results of the 2020 election, it's unlikely we would have been here. I think that if he happily accepted defeat, which I can't imagine him doing, his supporters would roll along with it. They wouldn't want to question their president quite as much, the guy that they root for. Maybe some of them would still say, oh, you're being a cuck. You should have said that it was rigged. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you disagree with me. Let me know if you think that the Republican Party has gone off the deep end. Let me know if you think it was the 80s, the 2000s, the 90s, the early 2010s, where the Republican Party went off the deep end. But this is my analysis, my thoughts, and yeah, the late 2010s, I think, is what really did the GOP in, and they're going to have a hard time recovering from the poison that is Donald Trump. So as always, if you liked the video, if you found it interesting or insightful, please leave a like, comment, or subscribe to the channel. I really do appreciate it. I really want to grow this channel. And as always, thank you so much for watching this video, and I look forward to speaking to you in the next video.